Welcome back, everyone. So welcome back to Microsoft Word. We're kind of waiting for a couple people to come in, and then we'll get started. Just a couple minutes. Before we do, did anybody have any questions they came up with from yesterday? I hope you're able to log in today. And you should see the one document we created yesterday, and we'll be adding to that today. Try this computer. That should work. I don't think this one charged all the way, but it should last 2 hours. The password is class-13. That's capital C, lowercase, and everything else. All right, so if we received your invitation today, then you saw that we're going to actually copy and paste some text into the Word document. So we're going to share from one program to the other. We did have a taker take us up on some free licenses. So again, if you know anybody else who'd like them, we got plenty. I think we have 1,205 left. So I don't think we'll be using those up anytime soon. So make sure you've logged into Microsoft Office. I have done it here. And you will see that when you open up Microsoft Office, now that we have a document stored, it comes up to our main screen and it shows the most recent document up here. That's my first Word document from yesterday. And you'll also see it down here in a list. So at the top, it'll show you about 5 documents, and it's always the most recent. Down below, it can go for a longer ways if you have a lot more files here, but it will show just as many as it can fit on there. So it's like 2 or 3 at the very top. So it's a good way to get back to what you were doing before. And I kind of like that. I think I mentioned yesterday that a lot of times you're working on the same document day after day, and it's kind of good to have up there. Later on, there is a way to lock a document at the top of the list, and that way you can find it quickly. You'll also see down here, you have the options for shared and favorites. So you can actually make some documents favorites, and that will make them appear in the list. And if you have 300 documents stored in your Microsoft Office, and 5 of them are your favorites, that list will just show the favorites. So that's, again, a way to get to things quickly. All right. So we're going to create a new Microsoft Word document. To create the document, yesterday, we went to the Word icon, opened it up, and saw all of our Word work. There's another way to do it. I think I said yesterday, in Microsoft Office, there's about 3 different ways to do the same thing, and you pick which way is your favorite and stick with that. Today, we're going to use this plus button. Whenever you open up Office, it doesn't default to one program or the other. You see them all stacked up on the side to the left. So if you click on this plus button, that's the create, and you can create what? You can create a notebook, you can create lists, spreadsheets, presentations. Of course, we want Word document. So I click that. And here comes my new Word document. I'm going to switch back. This is the exact same type of document you would receive as if you clicked on Word and new blank document. So just so you know, either way, that's a little faster from the home screen when you're in a hurry. Switch back to my new blank document. And here we go. You will notice that the change I made yesterday, where I told it to always show the classic ribbon instead of tools in my window, automatically appears. So it remembered that. I don't have to reset that every single time, which is great. So it does learn some of your habits and tries to accommodate them as you go along. I'm going to give my document a new name. So up here where it says saved, click on the little drop down arrow. And this one's going to be called The Raven. All right. So our goal here today is to take the text that I sent you in the email. It's the beginning of Edgar Allan Poe's The Raven, a Halloween poem. Should find something more Valentine's Day because it's almost Valentine's Day. But this is what we got. It's a classic. And what we're going to do is move that text over from the email into Word. So to do so, we set up the Word document. So it's the receiving document. And then I am going to switch back to my email. So here's the email I sent. And I'm going to select this first, well, this one paragraph. So from The Raven all the way down to nameless here forevermore. On my computer, I can right click and copy. Or if you remember from yesterday, Control C. So Control C works on a lot of different programs. So this is my email program. It works here just as well as it does in Word. So either way. So I've got it selected. Now, what it's done, it's copied it into my virtual clipboard. And the clipboard works between programs, and it basically is a storage area. It's temporary, and if I copy something new, this will be bumped down, and whatever I copy next will replace it. I'll go back to Word. And I'm going to paste. Now, if I want, I could certainly use this paste tool here with a clipboard, or I can paste with a Control V, or I can also right click and you'll see there's paste and paste text only. I'm just going to Control V. Here comes my text. Now, if you noticed what happened, remember when I started off, I'm going to undo. My font was Calibri 11 points. When I pasted it, you notice it switched to Times New Roman 9.5. Why did it do that? That's where it came from. It inherited the same characteristics from the original document. So if I go back here to my email, you can see the little serifs. So this is in Times New Roman. So the computer carried over the formatting along with the text itself. Sometimes you don't want to do that. So let's say this were a paragraph I was copying from somebody's email for our corporate minutes of a meeting. So I want to paste it in there. I don't want to use their formatting. I want it to be all my formatting. So I'm going to Control Z to undo. So it's still on my clipboard. And I did mention you can right click if you're using the IBM compatible computers. And you've got here paste with a Control V or paste text only. To do that on the keyboard, it's Control Shift V. So you're going to hold 3 keys together. Or I can click that. And there it is. Now you'll see it brought over all the text perfectly, but it didn't carry over the formatting. So that's the difference. You can format the text, pardon me, you can paste it with text or only, or you can paste the text with any formatting. Unless you're really familiar with your source, it's a good idea to use this. And one of the reasons is, let's go back to this email. In this case, it didn't, but if this could have been another Word document or another word processing document, there could be some other formatting that you don't see right away. So like, for example, margins. It could have smaller margins. And then when I paste it, the margins can come over and that'll mess up all my text and my document. So just by using that paste, sometimes they call it paste special, but that paste only text, then you don't have to worry about inheriting all that other stuff. All right. However, in this case, I do want it to be Times New Roman. That's okay. I can still switch it by selecting all the text. By the way, a shortcut in Microsoft Word, if you want to select everything on your document, it's Control A for all. So I just did a Control A and see how it's all selected there. Zoom up a bit. And then we use my drop-down list here. And you'll notice now it's carrying over my recently used fonts. So there's Times New Roman, because I was just playing with it. I'm going to select that. And I want to change the font to 12. If I use the pick list, I can see the different fonts, and there's 12, and I can choose this. One question that comes up is, why don't the numbers run from 1 to 72? The reason is, back in the ancient days, which is what, 15, 20 years ago, the printers had to interpret the text coming from the computers. So they actually had to have the fonts installed in them to print. Nowadays, they use a different style altogether, so it doesn't matter. You don't have to buy, you used to have to buy font cartridges for your printer, and those used to be really expensive. And you could only really print in those fonts. Otherwise, you would end up with little jagged edges and it wouldn't look right. So with that, there were only certain sizes that became standard. And so you'll see there's 8 points, 9 points, 10 points, 11 points, 12 points, skips over 13, skips over 15, 17, goes up to 20, and then to 24. And those were the ones that were supposed to print nice and smooth with no jagged edges. All right, so I'll change it to 12. And here we go. However, just because I don't see it on my list doesn't mean I can't have, say, for example, 15 points. So I type in 15 here in the box, hit enter, and see how my text went up to 15. And now, thanks to our modern technology, I don't have to worry about it printing. It'll print just fine. All the font sizes print just fine. So just keep in mind that you are always able to use any number you like. So let me go back. I'm going to put it down to 8. Oops. I have to select all first and then switch to 8 points. Because there's another way you can enlarge your font or make it smaller. I'm just going to start off at 8. So again, I've selected my text. And now I want to make it bigger. We have these tools here. Make bigger, make smaller. That's the A with the little up arrow, and A with a little down arrow. So I can grow the font size by clicking on it once. So now it's from 8 to 9. Now it's 10, 11, 12. And when I click it again, it's 14. Why did it skip 13? Not because it's unlucky, but because it's not on the list. When you grow the font size, it jumps you to these numbers, not anything in between the numbers. If you want something between the numbers, you have to put it in manually. Okay. The opposite is to shrink. So now I'm up to 20. I want to go back down to 12. I hit the down arrow. 18, 16, 14, 12. Does that make sense? So it's just another way of changing the font size. Sometimes if you have just a little bit of space that you're trying to fit something in, that's kind of handy because it lets you flip through really quickly the different sizes and you can see which one is going to fit the best. We've had issues where our documents go right down to the last line on the page. And if you make the font size, even from here, from 12 to 13, for example, it's just big enough to force it onto a page by itself. Just one little line. Well, we don't want that. So you can fiddle with it and make it a little bit smaller, and then it fits on the page nicely. So that's what the advantage of those little up and down arrows are. Again, my rule about how you can do everything in 3 different ways in Word. Once I have the text selected, I can also right-click on it. And from here, you do have some tools you can get into. So, and you'll see as I float over the text here, you'll get a menu that pops up. So you can use the same font size from anywhere in Word. Okay, so just again, pick your favorite way. Personally, I really do like typing the number in just so I know I get it right, but there are times where I use the other tools as well. All right, so there's our font, 12 point Times New Roman. I'm going to use another tool now. It's called a Paragraph Show Hide. And it looks like this backwards P. Here's the thing with Word. There are some text elements that you use that are visible. There are also some that are invisible. I'll give you an example. If you look between the words Edgar and Alan, there is a space. Right there, a gap. All right. So I know it's there, but by eye, could I tell if there's 1 space or 2 spaces? I just put another one in. Yeah, it looks a little off. How about the difference between 2 and 3 spaces? See? So I really, at this point, would be guessing if I had to tell you how many spaces are between there. So what I can do is I can turn this Paragraph Show Hide tool on. And this just makes the invisible visible. Spaces become dots. So you'll see now, I have 3 dots. So I know there are 3 spaces there. That's okay, I can take 2 out. So this is just an editing tool. You can print with this turned on and it does not print the dots. So I want to put the title on its own line. So I want to break up The Raven by Edgar Allan Poe. So I'm going to put my cursor to the left of the B. And then I'm going to hit enter. What I did is just I inserted a line. And you can see that now by that backwards P. That's the classic editor's paragraph mark. If I turn it off, I can't see it. Turn it back on, I can't. I also see I left an extra space next to the word Raven. I can see it with a dot. I'm going to take that out. Why? I'm not just being picky. There actually can be good reasons to keep it clean, and we're going to see that later on. Spaces do take up space, and sometimes having extra space there, you won't be able to see it. Like right now, I couldn't tell you if there is one or not, except I just put one there. but I can tell it now, and I want to clean it up. Okay. I want to do the same thing again between his name, the author's name, and the start of the poem. So I'm going to click to the left of the O, or I can click to the right of the P, doesn't matter, and hit enter. There's another line. This time, because I was to the right of the E, the space came with the word once. That's no problem. I use the delete key on the keyboard. And there we go. Again, I can turn that paragraph show hide off, and it's only there as an indicator. While we're on this visible invisible, there is one other important key that shows visible and invisible. It's the tab key. So I am going to go between the word lore and while, and temporarily, I'm going to insert a tab. So I'm going to click on the tab key. See how I get an arrow there? I click it again, there's another arrow. And then an arrow and a gap. If I turn off my paragraph show hide, I don't see anything. Turn it back on, there they are. I'm also going to make this its own paragraph by hitting enter, just so I can see them better right now. So I have 4 tabs. The way the tabs are set up in Microsoft Word is they're every ½ inch. So this is a ½ inch of space, this is a ½ inch space, and so forth. You can change those. There's lots of ways to make larger and smaller tabs, or you can just leave them like that. Usually the default tabs are good enough for most people and most uses. When I turn them off, you can't see anything. Here's why this is important. I'm going to hit enter again. My tabs are still up above. I can see them here. I'm going to put letter I, capital I there. I'm going to turn this off. All right. Let's say I wanted to get that word only to line up vertically with the letter I. Here's what happens for a lot of people. They say, okay, I can do that. And they hit the space bar. It's a lot of them, but it's working. It's getting closer. Okay, done. And if I turn the paragraph show hide, I can see all those dots. Those are all spaces. That works okay, but there is a problem. If you remember yesterday, we talked about the proportional spacing. So it was like the capital I, or pardon me, the lowercase I, the little I, and the capital E. So there's the I, there's the E. And how horizontally, they don't take up as much space. So all the fonts, except for Courier, do what's called proportional spacing, whereas the I doesn't get as much horizontal space as the E. Here's why it's important now. When you're lining things up vertically, the tabs take into account proportional spacing. Spacebar doesn't. The spaces won't. So this may look okay now, but let me try drawing a line here. And see how I completely covered the I, but I haven't even started covering the O. So it's not perfect. Say, oh, that's okay, I'll just take out a space. And that, now it's too far. So that's what happens. The space is Times New Roman 12-point space. It doesn't account for the width of the letter. So normally, most people wouldn't notice it. But if you're doing something like a formal document, like a resume, where the alignment does matter, what'll happen is, especially if you're using like a list, you're making a list of things, and you have thing 2. So basically, you know, a bunch of these things together, Yeah. If you use the spaces, what'll happen is you will start seeing a little invisible wavy type line where the letters just aren't lining up right. And that's because in this case, with the tabs, they do line up, but with the spaces, they won't. Just the nature of Word. So you should always try to use spaces. Sometimes you're using forms, and we still got form, and some are pre-printed, and you want your document to fill in the forms at just the right points. Tabs work great, and then sometimes you can use spaces for fine-tuning. But it's just a way to keep things aligned. And like I said, most people, they think, oh, space bar, and start smacking the space bar to get things lined up. And then they say, why isn't this working? I got the same number of spaces before each line. Well, the reason is it's that proportional spacing thing. So I'm going to turn off my paragraph show hide. You see, I can't see spaces or tab. If you're working on somebody else's document, trying to help them out, or they've sent you something and you need to incorporate it into yours, if you pasted it in with all the formatting, then what's going to happen is you may find that these things aren't lining up. And the reason is because they use spaces instead of tabs. Okay. There's another way to do this. It's called indents, and we'll be dealing with those a little bit later. But for right now, I'm going to remove this temporary stuff. So I select what I want to get rid of, delete on the keyboard. Here we go. Does that make sense so far? Once you get used to that, then you'll start seeing documents that don't line up right. And you say, oh, somebody used their spaces. Okay, so I'm going to turn on my paragraph marks. You will see now I have 3 paragraphs. Even though the Raven is only 2 words, because I hit enter here, Word counts that as paragraph 1. Next, by Edgar Allan Poe, paragraph 2. And then my last paragraph, the long one, is the whole poem itself. And there's my 3rd paragraph mark. So no matter what you do, you'd always have 1 paragraph mark. If I select all, hit the delete key, I've still got a dot and a paragraph mark. So you'll always have at least 1 when you turn this on. So I do want to add another paragraph. I want to do it here between only this and nothing more. And where it says distinctly, I want to add a new paragraph here. As I mentioned yesterday, I'm using the mouse. I could also use my keyboard. So my keyboard has arrow keys on it. So yours may too. So mine look like this here. If you have a 10 keypad, you'll see there are arrows on there too. If you want to use those, you have to turn on and off the num lock. Num lock turns on the numbers. If you hit it again, it turns on the arrows. Or you can use the 4 arrows that are dedicated keys, and that's what I'm going to be using. And you can navigate around. I'm hitting the down arrow. And then I want to go to off. So I can use the right arrow, but it goes 1 character at a time. Hold the control key, click the right arrow. It goes 1 word at a time, which is a lot faster. So here I am at off. You can also use the mouse. So again, different ways to do the same thing. The reason I like the keyboard when I can is I don't have to stop, take my hand off the keyboard, and then touch the mouse and then bring my hand back. It just takes a little extra maneuver. And apparently I'm not the only one, because they have been trying to make keyboard controls since day 1. And they even had one called the foot mouse. and it's just like it sounds. It's a mouse that plugged into your computer, but it stayed on the floor. And you moved your foot around on the mouse. It's kind of like a sewing machine pedal. And it rolled on the floor. And when you wanted to tap, you would tap your toe down and that would click. That would count as a click. And you can click and hold. And that didn't succeed. So you don't see them anymore. So that was one that, was an idea that sounded good on paper probably, but you have to be really coordinated to do that. And it might be distracting. Plus, on the floor, your mouse is gonna get all dirty. I can't really see that working. The other one they invented that I actually got to try, it's called the head mouse. So it sat on your head as a headband and it communicated with your computer. And wherever you moved your head, the cursor floated around the screen. And then you could tap your head to the side and that would count as the click. It was actually developed for paraplegics and quadriplegics, but they tried to market it to the office space like, hey, never take your hands off the keyboard again. And that one disappeared too from the office market. It gave me a neck ache, but might be a good neck workout. But anyway, it never caught on. So if you want to use the keyboard, keep in mind that it works pretty well. So I am to the left of the A and ah, and I'm just going to hit enter. So behind, I left a space up here after more. Now you can kind of see why those spaces are important, even though they don't show. I could turn it off and nobody'd be the wiser. Later on, if I do start working with the margins or something, this could make a difference. So to keep things clean, I'll just remove it. Okay, I have one more paragraph I want to put in, and that is between Lenore and Nameless. So I'm going to click to the left of the end and hit enter. Great. So that breaks up the poem some. And now we've got 3 paragraphs, a poem, a title, and an author. All right, good so far. Okay, so the next thing I want to do is I want to work on the paragraph alignments. First, I'm going to do the text alignment. I'm going to select from once down to evermore. And by the way, remember I said yesterday that my little habit of having all the tools up at once means I don't have as much space on my screen? Well, here come the consequences. Now, just looking at my screen, you can see I can't see everything all at once. I can't see that last paragraph. So what I want to do is select from once down to that last paragraph. So I click, start dragging, and then it jumps. Here's the thing. Whenever this happens, and this happens a lot with Word or Excel, just don't let go of the mouse. Sometimes what will happen is people will see this and they'll start scrolling down. They'll click, hold, start going down, and all of a sudden it jumps and they scream and they let go and see I missed. So I got to do it over again. So you click, hold, drag, just don't let go, let it run. And now, because I haven't let go of the mouse, I can fine tune my ending point here, and I've selected it all. If this were a very long document, and I'm just going to copy this temporarily. I'm going to put some copies down here so I have more than one page. All right, see all that junk? All right, so here's what can happen. I'm going to do it again. Select, start scrolling down. It goes too far, whoops. That's okay, because I can still scroll back up slowly. You'll see how it jumps a lot. So if this starts getting irritating, what I can do is say, all right, I'm not going to fight you anymore. I'm going to let go, say right about here somewhere. And while it's still selected, I can hold the shift key and the up arrow and the left arrow. Ta-da. Now I got what I needed. Okay. So that's, again, another way of doing this. This is, by the way, one of those times where even I might just use the keyboard. I can control shift down arrow and select it that way. There's one more user's trick you can use. You'll notice everything happens to be at the top of the page. The top of the page is a wonderful spot because you can't go beyond the beginning. See, no matter how I try, I can't go beyond the beginning. So rather than start here and select down, which is intuitive, what I could do is I could start here at the end of Evermore, click and hold, and scroll up. This time, when it goes crazy, it does go crazy, but it can't go higher than the beginning of the page. It's much easier for me to now, with my mouse, come down to the once and have it all selected. So that's just kind of one of those little notes that anything at the top of the page is a lot easier to select than anything at the bottom of the page. So I want to do that now. Yep, I did go over, but that's okay because I haven't let go of the mouse button. And now I've got my 3 paragraphs. All right, if I look on the right-hand side of my paper, you'll see that I have the words of each line lined up. But you see how they make this little pattern? Oops, my drawing is not so hot. But you can see how it's a jagged right edge. It's not a smooth right edge. So that's okay, because there is a way to fix that. Here we have some tools. There's left align, center align, right align, and full justify. So the way this works is right now you'll see the light gray on the align left. That's because that's actually what we're using. The computer defaults to align left, which is fine because that's where a lot of text just naturally appears. But I want to change it. So I want to change it to align center. Now you'll see that all the text aligns towards the center of the document. So each side is the same distance from the center within each sentence. What does that mean? Well, on the left side, now we have this jagged edge, and we still have a bit of a right jagged edge. Depending on what you're doing, like pull quotes, if you're doing an article, a pull quote will a lot of times be centered with the rest of the text left aligned, and that works great because it offsets your text from everything else in the document. Also, a lot of titles will be center aligned, but we do have another choice here, and that's right aligned. Just like that. Right alignment is just what it sounds like. The right-hand side is now all aligned on the right margin. The left-hand side, however, you can see this squiggly line for this. So that's used a lot if you're doing text quotations and you want to put the speaker or the original author. You can right align their name, and that will show up that way. And then we have one more option here, and that is the full justified. This one is used a lot in newspapers. It makes their columns. So I click on it. Now, when I look at my text, you'll see I have on the left-hand side, looks like a straight line of all my text. And the right-hand side, same as well. And you'll say, hey, but how can it do that? I mean, the number of characters in each line didn't change, and it didn't put any extra spaces in. I can see the dots. Where's the magic? Here's what it did. It stretched out the spaces just a little bit in each line in order to line it up on both sides. So there actually is a proportional space. In other words, in this sentence or this line, not all spaces are equal. Some are a little wider than others. Okay. So that's the magic of Microsoft Word's alignments. You will see that even though when I click on Nameless Here Forevermore, it is set to full justification. But you'll see it's still left alignment here. So it looks like it's left aligned. The reason is it's not long enough. And it would look crazy if the computer tried to stretch it out to say, okay, you want it, here it comes. I'm going to stretch this way out until I get ever more way over here. See, that would look terrible. So if the sentence or the line doesn't transect the middle of the document vertically, then it's just going to be left aligned. Okay. If it goes further than that, it will. So just keep that in mind as to why it does that. Now you'll notice I'm going to switch this back to left align, and you can't tell the difference. It doesn't jump, it doesn't do anything. Okay, I'll leave it center aligned for now. All right, so now we've got 3 paragraphs. I'll show you there is another tool you can use when doing alignments or any kind of formatting. I'm going to go back. Let me change this back to left alignment. Select it all here. Left align. If I had just done the first paragraph, so I selected it, I click on Justified. Ta-da. And I say, oh, I like that. I want my other paragraphs to be just the same. What I can do is I can use what's called the Format Paintbrush. So it looks like this over here. It actually looks like a paintbrush. The way this works is I dip my brush in the paragraph that I like, that has a good formatting. So it can be anywhere. I don't have to select a word. I can just be in it. I then click on the paintbrush. I don't know if you can see it, but it looks slightly grayed out around it. That's telling you it's pushed down, it's selected. And now I can select the next paragraph, and I can actually do 2 paragraphs at once. Here we go. I let go. And ta-da, now they have the same alignment. So that works like yesterday when we were changing font colors. If I want to change another font color to match one I've already done, I can use the Format Paintbrush. It works on alignments, vertical and centering, all kinds of tools. And we're going to use that a lot as we go along. It's much easier sometimes to use that than to recreate all the formatting. Right now, it's no big deal because we only changed 1 element, but it is possible that you could have 6 or 7 different elements. And just for funsies, let me just change this to 11 points. And I'll make it italics. Okay, so now my first paragraph is out of whack. I like it, but I want it to be like the second paragraph. So I am currently in the correct paragraph. I click my paintbrush. I select my first paragraph's text. And ta-da. Now, these 2 are exactly formatted the same. I can give you an example of when this is extremely handy. Again, if you're working on somebody else's document and they have some formatting and you've been going through and trying to figure out, okay, why aren't things lining up right? Or it just doesn't look right. It doesn't look like the other part of the document. If you want, there are ways to go through every single element of the text. But I have found, unless you're extraordinarily curious, like how in the world did they do that? It is much easier to say, all right, I don't know what they did. I don't care. I want my second or my first paragraph to match my second. I'm not even going to look to see, that looks like italics to me, but it could be a different font. So I'm just going to click on my right paragraph, select the wrong paragraph, and be done with it. And then you're all done. So it goes a lot faster that way. We worked on a county document once for them. And what had happened was somebody created it and had done a lot of work on it. It looked really good, but it had been like 2 or 3 years ago. So what happened was it became the standard document that everybody used when they wanted to make like an annual update or something. But as it went from hand to hand, some people made some changes, and they only made changes to their part, not to everything else. So at the end, they ended up with a document that had all these abrupt changes all over the place. And I said, well, they said, how can we fix these? And I said, I don't know, if you want, you can go through each one, or here, I have a suggestion. Which section do you like the best? Which is right or closest to right now? And they showed me. I said, okay, watch this. Let's do this format painter, and we'll change everything to this. And sure enough, it worked. It was much easier just to change it all, so it was all consistent, and then go back and make the extra modifications, like put in a different margin or italics and other things like that. So that paintbrush is really handy. All right, so now I have my poem is all justified. And I can always tell because I can click in any paragraph and I will see that this little justify button is turned on. I happen to notice I did miss one. Look at nameless here forevermore is not justified. So I could use a paintbrush. In this case, it's a little easier just to click it. Okay, now it's done. So now every paragraph in the poem is justified. See how that works? Now, just an FYI, I am going to zoom out a bit. The reason that's helpful is because it's justified based on your margins. And we'll see later on, it's a really handy tool because you might have to change margins later on for various reasons. All right, well, there's no questions on that. It's 6:55, it's break time. So we'll come back at 7:05. And we'll finish up our Edgar Allan Poe poem. get your volume. Try your volume. All right, we are back. Back to our regularly scheduled poem. So I mentioned that the alignment can be really important because you might have to change things later on. For example, you might decide to run this off on some pre-printed graphic paper that has some fancy borders or frames on it. And that could mean that your text will overlap some of the graphics. So what you can do is you can always change the margins. And we're going to try changing the margins on this just so we could see how it reorganizes the text on the page. So at the top menu bar here, we have all these different menus. We've been pretty much sticking with home. We're going to click around a little bit and go to layout. So if you click on the layout tool, you get the layout ribbon. The tool we're going to use to start here is margins. So if I pick the drop-down arrow on the margins, you'll see here are some pre-made margins that are pretty standard. So this document comes up as default with 1 inch blank area on the top, 1 inch blank area on the left, 1 inch blank area on the bottom, and 1 inch blank area on the right. So that's pretty standard. I think I mentioned yesterday we had some resume writers who just want to cram a little bit more in. One of the things we tell them they can do is you can relax these margins. So for example, you can change it to there's only 1/2 inch all the way around. So I'm going to click on this one. It says narrow. You'll notice my page switches, and now I only have 1/2 inch of white space all the way around. When you're doing this, if you're doing it just on a plain piece of paper, that's probably as far as you want to go. On paper, it looks really funny if things are way too off, far to the left or even to the top. What you can do though, if you're really, really desperate, is you can kind of do the bottom. You can go even further on the bottom and make that margin smaller so you can get a couple more lines in. But that's pretty close to as far as you want to go on paper. Now on the computer, margins don't really matter. A piece of paper can go on forever. So the margins don't take as much significance when it comes to web pages. However, if you're going to print it, it also makes a difference on the type of printer you're using. There are some printers that just will not print to the edge of the page. They're not designed to do that. They're always designed to have a margin. So if you turn off the margins completely and try to print it, you may lose some of your text. So then you see that and you say, oh, and come back. I have to change the margins. So you go back to normal. You'll see there's also moderate, where it adjusts the left and right a little bit, keeps the top and the bottom the same. A couple of different options. And there's always custom. Custom lets you set your own. So you can have, 1 inch to the top, 1 inch to the bottom, and then you can have the left maybe at 1 inch, but the right at 0.5. And see how my text always adjusts? The lines will change, the number of lines, as it crams in all the words, but it created more space on the left and the right. So I've got 1/2 inch on the right, 1.5 on the left. This is useful if you're using a 3-hole punch, because your 3-hole punch is going to leave some holes here, and that way it gives extra space for that, to allow for that. So for what we're doing here, luckily we have a lot of vertical space on our page. So I'm going to change it back to custom margins. I'm going to make it 2 at the top, 1.5 on the left, 2 at the bottom, and 1.5 at the bottom. By the way, as I'm flipping through these, I can click on them with a mouse, or the tab key will jump you through them. You can't hit enter. If you hit enter, that's similar or the same as clicking OK. And so you don't want to do that. All right, so now I've got a big gap on the left and right. I also have it at the top of the bottom. Bottom is not going to mean much right now, but definitely at the top. Let's go back to the home ribbon right up here. I'm going to select all, and just to see what it would do, I want to change to align center, and see that's how it would look like center. Do a quick undo, Control Z, and we're back. So that's the advantage of using these tools. If you had used like the spaces, for example, like for one thing I want to do is I want to make the Raven centered. And so I'm going to click on the title anywhere in the line and click on my center alignment. And now it's in the center. It's the center relative to those margins. Okay. So let's just say, for an experiment here, that I am the spacebar person. I'm going to try a contest. So I'm going to use left alignment. So instead of my alignments, I'm going to use the spacebar. I can hold the spacebar down, it'll automatically repeat. And there we go. Maybe one more. All right, pretty close. So casual eye would not see much difference in that. They look fine. However, let's go back up to margins under layout. And now I'm going to go to my custom margins. And for some reason, I want to change my right margin to 3 inches. Now watch what happens. The center alignment works just fine, right? So it accommodated because, again, it's centered based on the 2 margins on the left and right. My top one with the spaces didn't work. You would have to go back now and delete as many spaces to, again, try to line it up. And every time it changes, that would happen. You'd have to keep going back and changing it. And if you've used a center alignment more than once in the document, you have to find out every instance where you have all those spaces. So, big pain, much easier to let the computer do it. If you're doing this for work, you might think, well, big deal. I know this is the way I want it, so I'm going to keep it this way. But then you turn it into the boss, and the boss says, no, let's make more margin on the right-hand side. Oh, great. See, I got to go back and change it. So if you use the tools rather than the spaces, it works much better because no matter what gets changed, it always works relative to the changes. By the way, when you click in a paragraph, I'm going to use the word midnight, for example. If I make it left align, you'll see the whole paragraph changes. There are certain characteristics that affect paragraphs and certain characteristics that affect words. If I change it to align center, the whole paragraph's affected. That's because like the word volume can't be left align and everything else right align. There will be no way to do that. So certain things are affected by the paragraph, and the horizontal alignment is one of them. However, word color is not. See, I can make the word jury red. So that affects just the word. So there are certain tools that affect whole sentences, whole paragraphs, and other ones that affect just certain characters. I'm going to go back to my layout. I'm going to make sure my margins are correct. Yeah, so I got 1.5 left, 1.5 right, 2 inches top, 2 inches bottom. Let me zoom it up a bit. Okay, so the word "the Raven" is my title. Go back to my home ribbon. I want that to really stand out. So I'm going to select that text and I want to enlarge it. So I'm going to grow font size up until 26. Now, if you remember yesterday, I said you can't, or not that you can't, but you shouldn't overuse the different fonts. In this case, though, the title, it's a pretty well-known title. I could do a little bit with that. So I'm going to change that font to Chiller, C-H-I-L-L-E-R. When you're doing fonts, by the way, you notice how I scroll down and there's Chiller. I turn off my paragraph show hide. Oh yeah, that looks like scary font. Let me undo that though. The other way you can do the font is the same way you can do the size. So I click on my Times New Roman and I can start typing the word Chiller and you'll see it pops up in my list. That's handy because when I hit enter, it makes the change. I did not have to scroll all the way down. If this font had started with letter X and I was just scrolling, I would have to go all the way down. So it's much easier if I know the name to start typing it until it picks the correct one. As we saw yesterday, not all fonts are created equal. So Chiller, I'm going to turn off the paragraph show hide so we can see it better. Chiller at 26 does not look as big as the Raven at 26. So that just happens to be its style. So in this case, I want to go even larger, 36, to make it stand out. All right, see how that works? Okay, I want to click on by Edgar Allan Poe. And this one, I'm going to leave Times New Roman, but I want it to be not as prominent. So I'm going to make it smaller. Click the down or shrink font till it's 10 points. And this one I'm going to use as right align. So that way it's off to the side, he gets credit for writing it, but at the same time, as you're reading on the left-hand side, it goes from the Raven straight into the poem. Any questions about that so far? Okay, good. All right, so you will notice when you copied my text had some typos in it. Some the computer will catch and some it won't. So if there is a spelling question, the computer will show a red underline. I'm going to type out the word Evermore. See, Evermore, I'm missing an O. you'll notice it's got a little red underline. So that's a spelling error. If the computer questions the grammar or the style, you'll see a blue underline. So the word tomorrow here, it's got a question about grammar. The way to find out which is which, other than the colors, is you'll see it says click to view suggestions. If I click on it, it'll say grammar, and the suggestion is a space should follow most punctuation. So I don't have a space after my semicolon. So I can either choose to accept it by clicking here, I can ignore it, and it'll go away and not bother me anymore. Or I could just, put it in manually. I click on the spelling check, and you'll see here's my option, Evermore. Yep, that's the word I want. Again, I can select it, or I can use ignore all. You would use ignore all when you're going to have multiple instances of this word. Let's say this is somebody's name, Dan Evermore, and it's spelled correctly, but you don't want to see all those red underlines. Then what you could do is tell it to ignore all, and it will show up. My last name, Guerra. It used to be not in the spell checking list as a standard spelling word. Now a lot of names are, and mine is too. So mine used to show up all the time. I used to always have to tell it to ignore all. If you just leave it with the red underline, those red underlines never print. So you don't have to worry about them. If it's spelled correctly, you say, forget it. I'm not going to bother, and just leave it that way. In this case, though, that word doesn't belong there at all. So I'm going to just delete it. Okay. So the spell checks have gotten pretty good. I don't know if you know this, but when Microsoft Word first came out, there was no spell check. You could get a spell check, but you had to buy it separately, and it was like $200 or $300. But it was worth it. A lot of people have trouble with spelling, and it's good to have the computer look after it. However, you don't want to get too reliant on the computer, because it's good, but it's not perfect. And that's why I was saying, when it comes up with those lines, those either blue lines or red lines, those are suggestions. It's the computer saying it has a question about it. You can't always assume it's right. And the other thing you don't want to assume is that the computer will catch all your mistakes. So here's an example. I want a piece of pie. Now, you'll notice my word piece is not red underlined. It's not a spelling error. It'll come up as a word choice error, right? So it doesn't catch everything as a spelling error. Here's a notorious example. O's, capital O, and zeros look a lot alike. If somebody's just typing away and having a good run and accidentally types a 0 instead of an O, as in this case, visitor, you'll notice there's no error suggested. I can right click on it, it won't find the word, but any combination of letters and numbers in a single word, it will not catch. The reason is the number messes it all up. So it doesn't even think of it as a word. It thinks of it as something else. It doesn't have to worry about spelling or grammar. In my case here, because that 0 really stands out, it's kind of obvious. But if it were capitalized, I might not notice that one. Okay, so in this case, it's completely skipped it. So this one you have to do manually and fix it that way. It's a good idea always to read through your work and do a check, even with the spell checking working for you. You'll see tomorrow, same thing. And there's one more hidden. Has anybody found it? The last line of the first paragraph is supposed to say, tapping at my chamber door, only this and nothing more. Look what it did. It says N. Now, why didn't the computer catch that? That's a terrible mistake. Well, because the word end is spelled correctly. Grammatically, it would fit there. It just, knowing the context here, it doesn't make any sense. So that's when you definitely have to catch yourself and change. There is an old proofreader's trick. If you're trying to make a document perfect, what you do is, especially if you're the one who's been working on it, if you read it from the top on down, you tend to kind of even miss words anymore. You've seen it so many times and you're skipping right through it. And even as we read, sometimes as we're reading one line, our eyes are kind of looking to the next line and we can miss things. So the proofreader's trick is, instead of starting at the top, read it backwards from the bottom up. So like evermore, for, here, nameless. Then it makes you look at the words themselves, not necessarily the overall context. So if you're ever really paranoid about one document being perfect, like if it's a resume, that's a good way to do it. Read it from the back up forwards. Okay, so now we've fixed those errors. So keep that in mind, that as good as a spell check is, it's not perfect. And there are a couple other tools you can use, but nothing beats a good eye. All right, so now we have our title and our poem. There's one more thing with the Raven that I want to do. I want to change it. I want to underline it. So I'm going to select the text, and then I'm going to use my underline tool. It's a U here with an underline. So I click it. Now it's underlined. By the way, I'm going to undo. The keyboard shortcut is you can select it and then Control U. Hold the Control key down, type the letter U. That's a short way to do it. If you want to turn it off, it works the same way. Select it, Control U, and it's off. Or you can click the button up here, turning off and on. One thing about the underline is here's the Raven. If I had a space bar in there, see I can underline nothing. So, you know, well, let me correct myself. It's not nothing, right? There are spaces there. I can turn on my paragraph show hide. There are those little dots. So it is underlining something. But if you ever see that, there are ways to draw lines in documents. And sometimes you think, oh, somebody must have drawn a line because there's nothing there. Turn on the paragraph show hide. Ah, I see two spaces that don't belong there. And then another option is bold. So I'm going to make this title bold. So I have the big dark B under the font. That makes it bold. And what it does, it takes the same font, doesn't change the size, but it makes the text a little heavier. And so now you can see it. You can undo and redo. Once again, this is something that has a shortcut. If you want to use it, the keyboard shortcut is Control B, and then bold. Oops. Control B, back and forth. Does that make sense? Okay, so keep in mind though that I'm going to turn off the paragraph mark for a minute. As you're thumbing through your fonts, these fonts are displayed in their own font style. So Arial Black is Arial Black, that's what it would look like. But there are some fonts that don't look very good when they're bolded. And Arial Black can be one because it's already pretty heavy. And if you make it bold, it can just be too much. So if I select it, so now it's bold. Also, other fonts on my list here. I just did undo to get it back to where I wanted. Some fonts, like script fonts, do get really out of hand. And what'll happen is they get so bold, they kind of start overlapping each other and look really muddy. So not everything can be bolded. Find you a good example here. Okay. Yeah. That's not too bad. Let's do Blackadder. Turn off the bold. Call it Blackadder. This one, when you turn on the bold, see how the loop and the R, let me zoom up a bit. When it's not bold, you can clearly see in the R that middle loop. But as you bold it, you kind of start losing it. And some of it gets really muddy. So, you know, it's one of those aesthetic things. Let's go back to Chiller. I'm just using undo to walk back my steps. All right. So another tool that we have in addition to bold and underline is italics. So I'm going to take my text that's in quotation marks, and I am going to select it here, and I'm going to make it italics. When italics was first invented back in the days of the printing press, it wasn't meant to do as much as it does now. Now it's used for emphasis, but it was pretty rare. So, you know, one thing is you want to be careful about making too much italics, because you've emphasized too much, nothing's emphasized. But if you want to highlight certain things, you can do it with italics. So I used the buttons at the top. I'm going to undo. You can also do Control I. Control I. And then you turn it off, same deal, Control I. If I happen to grab to some visitor in italics and I muttered, which is not in italics, and I click my italics tool, you'll see it converts it back to neutral, which is basically not italicized. Then you have to click it again if you want it all italicized. And again, those are tools that affect the words, not the whole sentence. So words in a sentence can be italicized, they can be bold, underlined, and it doesn't affect the others. Something else happened when we copied our text over from the email. You will remember when we did that, here's the email. All the words are using kind of neutral quotation marks. And that carried over when we pasted it in, and you'll see they're just two little lines there. Well, I'm going to take those out, and here's why. When I type them in by the computer, it'll use curly quotes. You'll notice here, the first quote has that looks like an upside down comma, and the second one has looks like commas up high. Those are they call them curly quotes because they look like little curls, but they also indicate the beginning of a quotation and the end of a quotation. And you can see that here in the zoomed document, the difference between "'tis some visitor" and tapping. You'll see the straight quotes are there. That's a setting, by the way, if you ever decide, I want straight quotes, you can turn off the curly quotes and it will always use straight quotes. But I'm going to go ahead and change it. So again, that's one of those things by copying over the root file. Sometimes the formatting doesn't come across because some programs don't use those curly quotes. Word does. So as you're copying something, that's a good thing to kind of watch for. By the way, Wikipedia does not use those. And one of the things some teachers will do is look for those curly quotes to see if they're not there. Because if somebody's copied something from Wikipedia and just pasted it in without changing the formatting and fixing them, Word doesn't work that way, but Wikipedia does. So that's one of those little indicators to tell if somebody's not doing their homework and just copying it from Wikipedia. Okay, let's zoom back out a little bit here. See my document. Okay, the next thing we can look at is the space between paragraphs. So you'll notice down between the paragraphs, we have a gap. So there's a gap here and a gap there. I'm going to turn on my paragraph show hide here. There's no enter there. It's not an extra line. It's forced spacing by basically the computer changing the settings on how much space it's going to put between paragraphs. To see that, I'm going to click on my first paragraph. Then we have a tool up here. It's line spacing. Right there. So you can click this and you'll see there's just look like a font, 1, 1.5, 2, and everything. I'm going to click on line spacing options. It's going to show me the whole toolbox at once. A lot of times you don't need to see everything at once if you're just changing like line spacing, but this time we want to see it. Because here is, again, a place where I can change the alignment of my paragraph. So I can make it justified. I can make it left, centered, all the things we just did. You can also set up some indents, which we'll be getting to later on. I mentioned earlier today that we can change the tabs from 1/2 inch to other things. So here's that. But right now, this is what we want to focus on. You'll see that it says spacing before and after. So right now it's got 0 points before and 8 points after. That means it's pushing 8 points of space. Remember, that would be 8/72 of an inch of space between paragraphs. I'm going to change that to 0 right now. And then right now, it's set to multiple, but I want to change it to single. So I just want it to be single space. When it was set at multiple, it showed 1.08 down here at the bottom. When I change it to single, that just makes it single. So there's no space. I'm going to click OK. See how it's all crunched together? Also, see how it affected this paragraph here. It looks like it affected this one, but it really didn't, because remember, for this one to be affected, that before was set to 0, it's still 0. And look after it, after this paragraph at the end over here, and you'll see that gap. So it still has its paragraph spacing. Okay, so I turned it off. I actually want to go turn it back on. I want to make it bigger. So I'm going to go back up to line spacing tool. So we'll go to line spacing options. The shortcuts are here. If you want to add space before and add space after, I could just do this and then do it again until I'm happy. But I want to be a little bit more exact, so I'm going to actually go into here. And there's a couple of ways to do this. I happen to know my current font size is 12 points, right? I said I want it to be 12 points. So if I change this to 24, that's double 12. That means I've got the equivalent of 2 lines of spaces after this paragraph. You can see that? And sure enough, it looks like in this gap, I could fit 2 other lines there if that gap weren't there. Except that was fine, but it required some math. There's another way to do this. It doesn't require thinking about font sizes and everything else. So I'm going to go back to line spacing options. Instead of doing this way, the 0 after, I can just tell it to do double. What this will do is stretch out the entire paragraph so that each line is double space. So there's 12 points gap here in between each line. And then I can go back and line spacing and change it to after. So that really stretches it out. So you can change the spacing between the lines within a paragraph and the spacing after a paragraph by using these controls in line spacing. So we're all done, or when we're all done, I don't want it double spaced, but I want to make it 1.5 lines. So there's a little bit more space in the first paragraph and there's a second one, but it's not completely double spaced. Okay, so I want to do the same thing for the next 2 paragraphs. So there are 3 ways you can do this. Number 1, I could select all this, go into the settings and do it again like I just did. Or, here's a quick way, I could select these 2 paragraphs. You remember I said you have the option to use the format painter. What I could do is click anywhere where it's not italicized. If I click on the italics, it'll change everything in the next paragraphs to italic. So it has to be non-italicized text. Hit the paintbrush and select it all. Now they're the same. Everybody understand why I didn't want to use italics? Watch what happens if I do. So I say, all right, that's in the right paragraph. That paragraph's right. I select all this. And now that all became italicized. In this case, it's not that big a deal. I could just turn off the italics. And now I'm at the same. And then, of course, the other option is to use the tools. So after the text is selected, back into line spacing options. Say 24 after and 1.5. Now, when I zoom out a bit, it looked the same. And then all my text is all scrunched up at the top. All right, good so far. Okay, I'm gonna turn off my paragraph show hide. I'm done with that. And now I want to put a little pizzazz in it. So what I want to do is I want to put a border around my poem and I want to put a picture of a raven. So let's start with a raven first. To find a picture of a raven, I'm going to use another menu, Insert. So I click on Insert. Here's my ribbons, and you're going to see the tool Picture. So I select the picture, and here are my options. I can take a picture from this device, meaning my computer. The computer I'm sitting at right now. If I had one on here, like I snapped a picture of my camera, loaded it on my computer, I could use that. I could go back to our OneDrive. Remember yesterday? I said you could store pictures on the OneDrive, and it would draw the picture from there. I can use some stock images, which they have built into Microsoft Word 365. Or I can use Bing Pictures. Click on Bing Pictures. And with that, it's kind of like Google, and that is whatever images you want. So one thing I need to do is I need to tell it what I'm searching for. So when the search box pops up right here, where it says search Bing, I'm just going to put in the word Raven. Now, like with any internet search, you kind of have to think about your text. In this case, it popped up. Here's a raven. If I scroll down, what'll happen is anything that counts as a raven, including here on the right side, we have a superhero character whose name is Raven. See, the computer doesn't realize I just want it for Edgar Allan Poe's poem. I don't want a superhero because I didn't tell. I just said the word Raven. So everything that's got Raven in it, it's going to pop up. Oh, there she is again. She's in there twice. So you do have to kind of strategically choose your words. But in this case, we have a pretty good looking raven right there. So I'm going to select it. When I select it, you'll see there's a checkbox. You can select more than one. Right now, don't do that because it will slow things down a bit. But you can add more than one picture. I'm just going to use this one picture of this raven. And then when I'm ready, I can scroll down to the bottom and you'll see an insert. And it'll tell you how many you've selected. So insert one. And that's what I want. And here it comes. Okay, there's my picture. There's my raven. You'll notice it pushed everything else aside and it came in kind of big. So we want to adjust it. When you are selected on the picture, you will see these 8 circles. Those are the resizing handles. When you select on the background, or like on the word, the raven up here, they disappear. I'm gonna click on it again, and they come back. So what those are sizing handles. And what I can do is I can grab them and squish it down. So I'm gonna make it a lot smaller so I can work with it a little easier. There we go. So as you click on one of the corner circles and drag towards the middle, it'll make it smaller, pulling it out to the left, in this case, makes it bigger. You also may have noticed that when you're selected on the picture, you get a new toolbar up here, the word picture. When I'm on the text, like once, I click on the word once, picture disappears. But when I click on a picture, that toolbar and that ribbon shows up. So here we go. Now, wherever I put the raven, you'll notice the raven is pushing my text around. Well, I don't want that. I actually want the raven to float above the words. So I'm going to use this tool under picture called wrap text. I'm going to say I want this in front of text. So now my raven floats over my words wherever I put it. And I'm actually going to drag it to the bottom down here. I want to give it its own line, so I'm going to go next to Evermore and hit enter. And there's my raven. In the desktop version, you actually have more tools you can work with when working with a picture. But as I mentioned, this is one of those that they don't quite have all the tools transferred over yet. So one of the things you'll see here is there is a bending arrow at the top here. This is the rotation. So you can convert your picture and translate it to a little different rotation to give it a different look. Okay. There's some other tools we're going to start using later on, but if you wanted a frame around it, here's a quick frame like that. I don't like that at all, but good thing we have undo. And I make sure the picture is still wrapping in front of text. And because it's in front of text, I could actually overlay at the text on my text. The problem with that is, though, that if I put it over a word, you won't be able to read the word anymore because they're both black. So, there's some tricks we'll get into later on about how to fix that. The other thing I can do is I can copy and paste my raven. So I'm going to Control C, click in the background somewhere, Control V. Zoom out. There we go. I did it again. So I've got 3 ravens. If I wanted to, just make it look a little different here. I can put them at different angles. So you kind of have this idea of animation. How they're coming down. So you see how the pictures can work? And even with basic rudimentary excuse me, tools like this, you still can do an awful lot. Because it's in front of text, I'll move it up here. There we go. So I can zoom out, see what it's going to look like. Zoom too far. Now you'll see at the bottom, I do have a dotted line appearing. It's right here. That's telling me where the page is going to run out based on my margins. So there are times where, like I said, you get too close. So then I say, all right, that's fine, because now I know I can go to my layout menu. And I can change the margin at the top. Instead of 2 inches, oops, my computer just had to reload. I'm doing the zoom and the pictures, and it kind of got overwhelmed. So like I said, I can go into layout, go into my margins, custom margin, the top 2 inches was pushing it, so I'm going to say 1.5. There we go. Now it pulled it up, and there's plenty of room. All right, now it's ready to print. So any questions on the techniques we used today? We're going to be using a lot of them later on, because once you learn these, they become very handy. And we're going to work with some other text and a lot more graphics, color. I will say, if you are using a system like an older computer, the graphics will kind of start slowing things down, and you'll notice it. So my suggestion is, if you do that, you can still do it, but just put the graphics in at the end. Then it gets the easy stuff done first, like all the text formatting, and then throw the pictures in when you're just about finished, and that way it doesn't slow you down. All right, if there's no questions on our formatting of the Raven, then we are done for the evening. Have a great night.
Thank you. You too.
And then once again, tomorrow you'll get another invitation for tomorrow's class, and I'll put a recording of today's session on there if you want to review it. But otherwise, have a very good night.
Good night.